Hello, YouTube. So, Russia has announced that it is mobilizing its military reserves, which shows that the special operation in Ukraine must be going well, right? And of course, calling up the reserves will make a huge difference because on paper, there's like 2 million extra reservists, which would mean that Ukraine could be outnumbered 3-1 on the battlefield, to make a huge difference, right? No, this is absolutely operationally insignificant desperation measures by Russia. And the reason is that Ukraine, roughly, let's have Ukraine like that. There we go. That's Ukraine. And, initially, Russia made good progress towards Kyiv, and they made fairly good progress in the rest of the country. And at that, it's not quite the frontline strengths. They were somewhat weaker than this. But, in military terms, Russia has 1 million men and Ukraine 200,000. So it's kind of expected just on the numbers that they would do well. And that's just the military numbers. In terms of GDP, it's more like 10-1. So you would expect Russia, just on these broad brush numbers to be winning. However, not what happened. Most importantly, right, all of this was actually stopped more or less dead in its tracks, and it was held on the front line. And this is not to be underrated, that this is the first time since World War II that Russia was held in conventional warfare. It was held. It was stopped. Not happened since World War II. Things like Afghanistan very quickly devolved into guerrilla warfare, asymmetric warfare, that sort of thing. None of that here. It was just directly held in conventional warfare on the front line. And then there was months of attrition, during which Ukraine, with more sophisticated weaponry and a more motivated army, attrition this front line away to the point where Ukraine has now shown that it is capable of not only holding Russia, but conducting maneuver warfare that can actually break through its front lines and defeat it on the open battlefield, which is, key point number 2. Russia was defeated in conventional warfare. And again, this hasn't happened since World War II, the height of the German invasion of Russia. And this is with this huge superiority that they had. And you take a look at what's happened on the front line, right, is the weaponry has been attritioned away, and you can't just throw extra bodies at it and expect to significantly change the outcome. With maybe, and again, let me inspire you with my artistic depiction of the Moskva. That's the Russian flagship in the Black Sea, which was, of course, sunk by the Ukrainians. You can't just put up 200 conscripts in swimming trunks and expect them to be as effective. Actually, the Moskva was in terrible shape, but even ignoring that, actually all of the invading Russian army here was in terrible shape. Their equipment. So even if they had motivated people fighting with it, there's limits to what you can do with obsolete, unmaintained equipment. And what are the key points? The Russians couldn't hold with their A team. They put in the A team, and the A team couldn't hold the front line. They're now going to try and throw a lot more extra bodies at it in terms of the B team, who are, number 1, less well equipped. So they got less stuff to fight with. Number 2, they are less well trained. Also, not, not a good omen. And number three, my rating is terrible. They are less motivated. Having actually seen the A team get defeated, throwing a bunch of conscripts onto the front line, reservist conscripts, is unlikely to change anything. Now, you might say, well, hang on, wasn't this sort of how Russia won World War II? In the, they just won by sheer numbers. And the answer is not entirely. So, at the beginning of the war, when Germany invaded, they basically rolled over the frontline Russian strength, which was very similar to the moment, poorly trained, poorly maintained, and poorly motivated. So basically, all of the frontline strength was actually destroyed, and they made it all the way up to Moscow. And had it not been for the Germans suffered huge losses, by the way. I mean, the Germans were largely a broken force by the time they got to Moscow. But the thing that really held the Russian front together for the first year or so was resupply from the Allies, most notably in terms of there's this huge convoy of trucks that came in from the south run by the Americans. There's this old saying that Russia was held together by 2-ton trucks, Fords, I think. Might be wrong there. Anyway, there was this huge supply, and those trucks was what allowed the Russian army to move around. Without them, that would have been the end of it. Without the fuel to do it, that would have been the end of it. And there were loads of Arctic convoys that came in that supplied them with British convoys carrying American tanks and the such like. And that's very much what held the Russians together for the first year of the war. After that, they managed to get their own supplies going much better. But even at that, I think most of the fuel was supplied by the Allies, I think. They obviously made some huge number of tanks, T-34s, that were very instrumental. And, of course, they were very motivated. And, that's basically... And they had more, which is what won the war for them. But you take a look at, what does that make? They were motivated, and they had equipment, neither of which are present for the moment. Neither of these is going to improve for the moment. So it's usually the problem. Once you've actually been defeated in open combat on the front lines, this shows that you are militarily inferior, which means wars are usually dictated by the people who are better on the battlefield. And at the moment, that's the Ukrainians. And none of this will change any of that. So, and not only that, I mean, even if they do manage to mobilize 2 million people, just getting 2 million people to the front line is a logistical nightmare. And putting 2 million untrained people on the front lines, or barely trained people on the front lines, is it saps the morale of the real troops who are there, who have no faith in their less trained conscripted brethren, and they've got no real motivation to fight. I mean, the whole thing is military people usually don't like having those sorts of people on the front lines, because if the whole deal is you have a bunch of conscripts here and a bunch of conscripts here, and your well-trained army in the middle, well, the enemy just sort of goes through where the conscripts are and surrounds the real army. So I mean, it's not a good. And of course, if you actually you meld these units together, then it just saps the fighting spirit of the army. The real troops realize when their numbers are just being fluffed by people who don't really want to be there. Anyway, so yeah, that's the big news from Russia. And yeah, it's extremely unlikely to make any difference whatsoever. Anyway, if you enjoyed that, maybe drop a thumbs up on it. And there's maybe a Patreon's account somewhere. So yeah, if you enjoyed that, that's great. And I will see you next time. Ciao.